you for carving out time in your day to join our webinar, More Than Able, Hiring and Retaining People with Disabilities. My name is Julia Gaynor, and I'm the Senior Content Manager at Monster. I'm responsible for creating content that helps our employers make better hiring decisions. We know that your time is incredibly valuable these days, so we will do our best to give you a little bit of time at the end of today's discussion, although we expect it to be a very lively discussion, so it might take the full hour. There will be a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A or chat function at any time throughout, and one of our panelists may answer you live if he or she is able to, or we'll do our best to read your question to our panelists at the end. Also, we will be sending out this recording tomorrow, so no worries if you have to drop early. So today we are thrilled to have a group of incredible thought leaders joining us, all of whom have specific expertise in hiring and supporting people with disabilities, and we'll be introducing them shortly. And you can see the agenda for today's presentation right there. But first, I would like to introduce my co-presenter for today, Abba Osunsade. She is the Vice President of Global Community and Belonging from Brandwatch. This week, Monster and Brandwatch, we released a co-branded report entitled The Changing Conversation Around Work and People with Disabilities. And again, you'll all be getting a copy of this report. And together, what we're going to do is Abba and I are going to share some learnings from that report at the beginning of this webinar. But first, Abba, would you please tell our attendees a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for everyone who's joining live. My role at Brandwatch focuses on making our business as anti-oppression as possible, from marketing to recruitment to product design. We're very aware of the fact that when you have a hegemonist team, a hegemonist industry, it's very easy to not always include all the voices that are essential for you to be an inclusive and representative culture. So I work on everything from training programs that help us understand our bias and inclusion better, to community partnerships with organizations on the ground, working directly with folks with the lived experiences that we are lacking in our global team. And I'm so excited to be here with you, Julia, to run through this report and also to meet our exciting panelists.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Abba. I think we all wish we had an Abba on our team. I know I do. And I'm sure that like Brandwatch, many of you have been working tirelessly to ensure that your hiring strategies, among other things, are as welcoming and inclusive to the most diverse pool of candidates possible. It's certainly something that we've been focused on here at Monster, especially over the last year and a half internally, in how we approach our hiring and recruitment, as well as our, internal talent management, and really how we approach our culture here at Monster, but also, because what we do is we both help candidates find jobs, but we also help employers, really kind of think about their hiring strategies. So we've been helping a lot of our customers find, meaningful ways to update the diversity, equity, and inclusion recruitment strategies. And that's what today's webinar is all about. So before we open up our panel discussion, we wanted to share some highlights from the Monster and Brandwatch report. This was a joint effort, and so we'll share some of the things that we kind of learned and uncovered. So this first slide that we're sharing here is, when we started to kind of look into and start digging into some of the data points around people with disabilities in the workplace, and I'm sure that anyone here is on this webinar is starting to look into this as well. We actually were pretty shocked to find that based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 1 in 5 working Americans have some kind of disability. And of course, disability it's a broad spectrum. And our panelists are going to talk about a number of different types of disabilities that people can have, everything from neurodisabilities like autism to, some of the more physical disabilities that I think might come to mind, like vision impairment or hearing loss or mobility related disabilities, and so I think when I was able to expand it out and include everything that might fall under that umbrella, 1 in 5 didn't actually seem as surprising. I think the other thing that was really, and this is why we wanted to include this particular stat on this slide, is this idea that not everyone is born a particular way. And for so many people, over the course of their lives, over the course of their careers, they change, their needs change, and potential adaptations that employers may or may not need to make change, but people change. And I think that's why it's so important to kind of understand the breadth of which all of this, expands. And so the next slide is actually about we here at Monster, we do a global survey, and it's actually our next one is coming out in January of 2022. And we, across the globe, we survey both candidates and employees, as well as recruiters and anyone really involved in the talent acquisition, in a company, small business, medium-sized business, or enterprise level. And last year, we asked a lot of questions about how people were planning to address diversity, equity, and inclusion when it came to recruitment. And what we found is that most people, had something in place to address gender-related issues, race and ethnicity, age, but only 7% of the employers who responded actually had a plan in place to address recruiting people with disabilities. And we thought that was kind of shocking. And hopefully next year that number will change. And we can move on to the next slide, I think, here. Yes, so the next slide is actually something from the Brandwatch report, and I wanted Abba to talk about this one.
Yeah, so I really like the point you were making, Julia, around, just how many folks with disabilities are in the workplace and are in our teams. And what I think is really interesting to remember is that a lot of people are living with disabilities that they haven't disclosed to their managers or to their teams. And we know so many reasons for this. Sometimes it could be something that you're worried might be used against you in a recruitment process, or you're worried it might be something that could be used against you as you're operating in your role. So I think this is a reminder to all of us that psychological safety and trust is so important. We can see that the number of folks who are entering unemployment has increased, people with disabilities significantly, as well as people without disabilities. Sometimes people who have a lived experience of a disability are having that impacting their productivity. But if they haven't had an opportunity to tell their line manager about it, it could be seen as just below average performance. So I think it's just a reminder to really create those environments of trust and actively invite people to share what they're struggling with, so that it doesn't get to the point where it's assumed it's a performance issue when it actually could be something else that they need greater support from their team on. Let's move on to the next slide. Just building on that, it's so important for us to continue having conversations about neurodiversity, which is an invisible disability for many people. Thankfully, we see more and more people talking about this online, on social media, in forums, in blogs, which is incredible. It means that even if you, like me, aren't still super adept at handling these conversations because you have a neurodominant brain, that's a privilege I'm happy to call out. There's a number of resources and forums that we can tap into online to build our confidence in this space and create space within our teams to have the conversations that let us know how we can improve to support employees with that experience.
Absolutely, Abba. I think that's so important. And I think, like you said, having that conversation, because I think even just working with teams, besides recruitment and kind of that greater level, just working on teams, if we have understanding of what someone's going through, then it makes it so much easier to be able to help and support one another. So another, kind of thing, something we do at Monster on a very regular basis, actually every 2 weeks, we poll our candidates. And because we really want to understand what's going on in the mindset of our candidates and what their stresses and their struggles are. And very recently, we actually asked them about how they, if they have consider themselves to have an invisible disability, which Abba just mentioned, which I think is if you don't disclose, it could be something that someone may never know that you have. And 73% actually said that they feel they would identify as having an invisible disability of some kind. And I think something that we're finding a lot too is that with remote work, disabilities are becoming even more invisible, where people aren't actually interacting as much face to face. But what was also, somewhat shocking, somewhat not shocking, like Abba just mentioned, people are just not, half of the people who responded said that they are not comfortable disclosing, not only to their manager, also another poll that we said over half of those are not comfortable disclosing it during the hiring process, which isn't surprising, but I think it's up to all of us to create a more inclusive hiring process so that there is an opportunity for someone to disclose all of who they are during that recruitment process. And then, something that was also not that great is that over half don't feel supported by their employer to manage their disability at work. And I think to Abba's point, I think that people are scared to say that they need help or they need an adaptation of some kind. And that's something that we all have the power to change. If we could move to the next slide, please.
So I wanted to give you guys a snapshot of some of that firsthand primary source data that we got from folks across the internet talking about their lived experience of being in the workplace with disabilities. It's been incredible to see the impact of the pandemic in surfacing these issues. Working from home in many ways has been a great leveler for people because they have a flexibility that they didn't have when they had to commute into the office. So I think it's really interesting as we think about what returning to work looks like, to think about what bits we want to keep and what bits we actually want to even evolve and adapt on in order to make our workplace as inclusive as possible and accommodate for the needs of the people who aren't represented in the dominant groups. I also think it's really important for us, to the points that Julia mentioned earlier, to make sure that when we are talking about what equity, diversity, and inclusion means for us as employers, as leaders, that we don't focus on the topics that are always trending in the headlines or seem to be often trending on social media. Yes, with Black Lives Matter happening in 2020, of course, race became really important. The Me Too movement is still super relevant for us, so women's rights continue to be important. But ultimately, we want to be willing to explore our identity through that lens of intersectionality and think about all of the different traits that give us privilege, but also which sometimes bias us to the experiences of others. And that's where I think this focus on people living with disabilities is so important. I also just wanted to remind everyone that, social media can be such a great place to tap into a lived experience that you don't have yourself, but which is on your team or something that you care about. So please, don't be shy, checking out subreddits, going on Twitter threads and seeing what people who are living with disabilities are saying about what they want to see from employers, what their version of an ideal culture would be. There's a lot of free advice and free information out there that we can start to build into our processes.
And, something I think oftentimes if you're in a position to make change happen at an organization, you have to actually convince the people, other people to go along with you, right? So the, senior management, et cetera, executive leadership. And, sometimes we like to remind our audience, our customers that, doing something because it seems to make sense from a cultural perspective can also actually have an impact on the bottom line. And so we really like this study that Accenture did that says that companies that hire workers with disabilities outperform competitors, with an average of 28% higher revenue. And I think this is something we actually see a lot when we look into companies that are working to have a more diverse workforce overall, because and it makes sense, like Abba mentioned, if with homogeny does not necessarily come great work, does not necessarily come great results. So the more diverse you can make your workforce, and studies are now actually backing this up, the better as a company you may perform. And let's see.
Right. So this is a timeline. And I think what's really interesting about this timeline is sometimes we wonder, why now? Why are these topics so important now? Why are we so energized to make change? And it is really interesting to think about how we do become incentivized when legislation changes. I mean, I can just think of my own personal experiences here in the UK, where I'm based. I'm in London. When gender pay gap reporting became something mandatory for companies with more than 300 employees, it became a big conversation for everyone in leadership, everyone in recruitment. Suddenly, everyone wanted to start thinking about their gender pay gap so that they had a really positive story to tell. So I guess what I'm trying to say to the audience today is, what is the story that you want to tell about people with disabilities? How can you always be ahead of the curve? And instead of waiting for it to be something that you have to do because it's mandatory, because it's something that the government dictates, how can you be progressive and forward thinking and start building that really exciting employer brand around being a person with disabilities right now, because I think that's where there's that really exciting opportunity to cut through the noise and have a competitive advantage, like lead the pack, lean into these resources, lean into the Monster Network, and be ahead of the game. On to the next slide, please. Yes, so I wanted to talk again just about these trending topics. It's really interesting to see just how much engagement these topics have and how much people care. And I think what's really interesting is that a lot of times when it comes to underrepresented employees in the workplace, you find that it's people with the lived experience that are always championing for change and advocating for change. But what's been really positive over the last 12 to 24 months is that people want to be allies and people want to be champions and people want to solve problems that aren't personal problems to them, but because, to Julia's point, they see the benefit, not just in their own experience of showing up to work, but also in the bottom line. So people are really thinking about not just hiring and recruitment anymore, but hiring and recruiting people of diverse backgrounds and how they can pay them equitably and how they can create workplaces that are accessible and how legislation can support the changes that they want to make. So overall, we're definitely moving in a positive direction, but this is a journey and there's so much work for all of us to do. And as stakeholders, it's important that we keep people with disabilities front of mind as we shape our policies and shape our priorities moving forward.
And I think that this is another stat that we found, that I think that sometimes when people think about, maybe if hiring people with disabilities, that there's this sense that there's a lot of effort that, has to go into actually making accommodations for people who have disabilities. And this is not the case. Only 15% of disabled workers in the US actually require their employers to actually take some type of action. So we just thought that was worth, then oftentimes I think that, there's a lot, and in a moment, we're going to talk about one thing that, a kind of a strategy that employers can take to try and expand their ability to hire people with disabilities. But I think sometimes people think that things will be harder than they are when in fact they're not, and so we wanted to just make sure to highlight that particular data point. And this is the final thing I want to say before opening up to our experts to really share their knowledge and expertise is, and this touches on what Abba was talking about with storytelling. And, one of I think the most powerful things that a brand can do, that a company can do to both show candidates that they are a safe and welcoming place to work is to actually do that, to show the candidates that, and that starts with your career site. It starts at really, well, it doesn't necessarily start with your career site. It starts by taking an audit of what it is, what your company is currently doing, the benefits, and the kind of the atmosphere that you offer culturally, making sure that everything that you're doing online is it passes ADA compliance, so that actually you're not creating barriers for people who are trying to actually take a look at your company, making sure that your career site has language and in imagery, and also that your job descriptions have language in there that make it clear that you are not just open and welcoming, you are welcoming with open arms, and you would like even more people with disabilities to apply. And then we'll get into this in our panel discussion, thinking about your tech stack. So this is something that, we focus a lot on at Monster. It's one of the solutions we provide is helping companies to improve their employer brand, especially when it comes to hiring a more diverse workforce. So I wanted to make sure to bring that up. And so that's really the end of this part of the presentation. And now I'm going to pass it over to Abba and the rest of our panel for what I know is going to be a fantastic discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julia. I'm really excited for this panel because we have such a great group of experts gathered together. And also, I want to learn. I always want to learn more about what I can do in my role to create a more inclusive culture at Brandwatch. So first, I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves very briefly, and then I'm going to jump into the questions. Nish, please tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do.
Hello, Nish Parikh. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Rangam Consultants, where I say empathy drives innovation every single day. And through this empathetic approach, we are constantly building workforce solutions for our customers, to promote employment for everyone inclusive of people with disability, neurodivergent talent, and disabled veterans. As a socially responsible organization, we believe it is our responsibility, it's our job to help our customer build those hiring models. So we are truly bringing in diverse workforce and bringing in innovation for our customers. And thank you, Monster and the team, to have gave me the opportunity to come and talk about this very important topic.
Amazing. Thanks, Nish. All right, let's hear from our next panelist. I think we're going to hear from, shall we hear from Felicia next?
Thank you so much, Felicia Nurmsen. I'm not sure. Thank you.
There you are.
Felicia, here I am, Felicia Nurmsen, Managing Director of Employer Services for the National Organization on Disability. I oversee all of our consulting that we do for companies. We are an almost 40-year-old national nonprofit and one of only two disability agnostic. And what that means is we are really working to create equal access to opportunity for all people with disabilities with a focus on employment.
Amazing. I can't wait to tap your brain in a second. Okay, let's hear from Cristina next. I invite you to turn on your camera and tell us more about you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Jones. I am the Vice President of Population Health at Easterseals, New Jersey, where I have oversight of our IDD portfolio, where we provide opportunities for individuals with disabilities, not only IDD, but those with deaf and hard of hearing and visual impairment, to either find employment, but also to live, work, and just be part of their communities. And I'm excited to be here today.
We are so excited to have you. I'd love to invite Aubrey to turn on the video and tell us more about them.
Hello. Hi, my name is Aubrey Sokolowski, and I work for a program called Neurodiversity in the Workplace. We are headquartered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but we also have a colleague in the greater Boston area. Our team at Neurodiversity in the Workplace strives to make neurodiversity a pillar in diversity and inclusion recruitment and talent acquisition, hiring practices. We got our start about 6, going on 7 years ago, partnering with the German software company SAP with their Autism at Work program. Since then, we continue to work with companies across the United States to design and implement autism and neurodiversity hiring programs. On the opposite end of that, we work with neurodivergent and autistic job seekers to help them find full-time meaningful employment. And I just want to say thank you to Monster for inviting me to speak today.
Wow, what a panel. I'm so excited. So I have so many questions I want to ask, covering like a bunch of different themes within this topic. And how it's going to work is I'm going to actually direct my question to one of the panelists. But if another panelist has a really burning addition they'd like to say, as soon as that person's done talking, just unmute before I move on to the next question. So let's start with that first question. Monster's Future of Work report revealed that only 7% of employers consider disabilities as part of their DEI recruitment because they're weighing gender, race, age, and other factors more heavily. So why should employers focus recruitment efforts and inclusivity on people with disabilities? And what are the first steps that a company should take to update their recruitment strategies to include people with disabilities? And Felicia, I'm coming to you first.
Thank you so much, Abba. Unfortunately, this is what we continue to see with our employment tracker results as well, year over year, of the companies that are actually including people with disabilities in their recruitment or within their hiring process. In 2021, the percentage of companies that are actually tracking those key metrics for their other DEI targeted populations, as you just mentioned, is more than double that of employers tracking people with disabilities in the workforce. So lots of work to do there. And why should employers focus on people with disabilities? Well, there are a couple of reasons that I can talk about. We should focus on people with disabilities first because of the business advantage. So if you compare the unemployment rate overall of people with disabilities versus just the average unemployment rate, you showed it earlier as far as 2019 versus 2020, but in August, it was 5.2% versus 10% for people with disabilities. That means that we have over I don't know, 10 million job openings on any given day that are not being filled. And the fact that we have over 24 million working age people with disabilities makes this a huge untapped talent pool for people. Second is disability is diversity. You talked about it earlier too. It is the only category that any one of us can join at any time. I do self-identify as a person with a disability. I have a hearing impairment and I wear hearing aids, as well as I live with mental illness. Now, you talked about 83% of disabilities are the result of age, illness, or injury, and 75% are hidden. So we really do have to understand that overall picture of people with disabilities in order to understand how to recruit people with disabilities. Then really we should be taking into consideration the emerging global market. So 1.1 billion people with disabilities have 1.9 billion friends and family. That makes up almost a $9 trillion market for companies to tap into. And what better way to do that than to hire people with disabilities to help you to develop and test new programs and products for people with disabilities. And first steps for hiring, it really goes to doing an assessment, right, of your workplace, reviewing all of your policies, process, et cetera. It sounds like it could be an overwhelming prospect, but we're doing that on a regular basis as companies anyway. And just putting the disability lens on those policy process, accessibility of not only the facility, but accessibility of all of your programs and tools, computer, et cetera, that people use in the workplace on a daily basis. You need to know where you're starting from in order to build the strategy and appropriate goals.
100%. And I love that idea of applying that lens because that's so actionable. That's something we can all do. Put ourselves in the shoes of the folks we want to hire and attract and assess everything from that perspective. I kind of want to pivot into a conversation around remote work and get Christina's input on this because I want to learn more about how remote work has impacted people with disabilities. Has it opened more opportunities? But also, what are the potential drawbacks, to remote work? And what should companies be mindful of to make remote work for people with disabilities?
Sure. So remote work has opened the door for more opportunities for individuals with disabilities. For example, job seekers. Individuals are empowered to either disclose or not disclose a disability to their employers, especially if they have some sort of physical disability that would be very apparent if they were in person. It was discussed earlier that one of the barriers to people with disabilities is transportation or getting to work. So remote work takes away that barrier as individuals can work in their own environments. Under the ADA, employers, they must provide accommodations to meet the need of employees, but in some cases, employers provide the bare minimum accommodation. So remote work allows people with disabilities to utilize their own at-home computer setup for features like magnification, screen readers, and specialized lighting, excuse me, if they have certain preferences or photosensitivity. People with disabilities are also able to work in a way that's comfortable. So for example, someone with a physical disability, they were in a car accident, they can't sit in a chair all day. They can lay down, they can put their computer in a way where if they're on a meeting, you can't tell that they're laying down, but they're able to do their work in their own home. There are some drawbacks to remote work for people with disabilities. A lot of the clients that we work with experience increased loneliness and depression. There's also some communication barriers, especially those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the deaf and hard of hearing population, and individuals with visual impairments. To make remote work for people with disabilities, companies should engage employees by utilizing virtual platforms such as Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Similar to this webinar, turn on the closed captioning feature for virtual meetings. And I know people are tired of Zoom meetings and turning on their cameras, but ask staff to turn on their cameras. And also provide assistive technology for people with disabilities to leverage at home.
Wow, what a comprehensive answer. Thank you so much, Christina. What I love about that is that it's a reminder and challenge to all of us to make the experience for people working from home as equitable and productive as people working in the office. And a lot of us still need to make the investments to do that. I want to switch gears to talk about neurodiversity. I mentioned,
if I may add just one point, that one of the big benefits which we all have experienced is getting access to the jobs where we didn't have access to. So there is no travel needed, people with disability. So it has opened up the whole complete new horizon and more opportunities at almost global level, but absolutely at the nationwide. And that is huge because now we have more options and more opportunities to explore for people with disability.
That's so true, and such a positive and exciting reminder. Thank you, Nish. So as I mentioned earlier in this webinar, I do have a neurodominant brain, which means I have to work a bit harder to understand folks who have a lived experience of neurodiversity. And there is a lot of attention paid to this topic right now, especially people with autism. And we understand, to Nish's point, there's actually an increasing opportunity for workers with unique lived experiences. But Aubrey, I want to tap into your expertise here. What should companies do to ensure more opportunities are available to the neurodiverse population? In your experience, what misconceptions do companies have about neurodiverse candidates, and how can we appropriately screen them?
Absolutely. So increasing opportunities for neurodivergent and autistic job seekers is exactly what we do at Neurodiversity in the Workplace. We help companies think through this specific area of the neurodiversity application and support process. And we work with each company based on their culture to identify the best way. So we find that having an altered interview process for neurodivergent candidates, for example, having candidates showcase their skills in a portfolio to hiring managers helps to avoid conversational bias in interviews. Another example would be something just as simple as sending out questions ahead of the interview to allow for candidates to prepare. We've successfully done this with our company's partners, some of them including SAP, Bank of America, and Dell Technologies. And we know there are, many misconceptions regarding the prevalence of neurodivergence. In fact, over 2%, I believe it's 2.21% of adults are autistic, and 1 in 10 have a learning disability. So statistically speaking, your current team is neurodiverse, and companies are already accommodating and celebrating this.
That's incredible and such a powerful reminder. 1 in 10. Nish, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would add one thing, which is also misconception is about neurodivergent talent, which is kind of true that they are great in the IT jobs. But what as a workforce solution, as we are building these programs, we always start with IT jobs, but we know that every individual is different. They are bringing in different abilities, different strength. So it is our job. How do we help employer partners to expand this horizon for all kinds of jobs? So all our implementations with global financial institute and large life science pharma companies, we start with whatever they have learned from outside for certain jobs in that area. But then slowly and gradually, we help them expand that for all kinds of jobs. And our recent addition to that is we have built AI-driven patent pending technology where we are scanning these millions of jobs and kind of helping organizations identify jobs where we know that research-driven data shows that these individuals it's a higher probability of having them success. So we are kind of helping them and influencing them to just scale up those programs, because that's the key. Just 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 hires is not enough. When we are talking about all these big numbers, we have just amazing talent pool, but we have to tap into more kinds of jobs throughout the spectrum.
Amazing.
Can I just add one thing, is that
Please.
Everything that we just talked about is good for all people with disabilities, right? The one thing that the Autism at Work programs have done is it has shown that large companies can create other processes to effectively hire different populations. And that is huge. And we should be looking to not only expand the jobs that are available to neurodiverse candidates, but then opening that aperture up that we have built now to include all people with disabilities instead of just targeting one population.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Here, here. Thank you so much, Felicia. And what an amazing reminder. Nish, I want to come back to you actually and talk a bit about technology and automation, because these things, especially personality tests, assessment tests, have really come under scrutiny when it comes to hiring people with disabilities. So talk to us about what companies should know about these tools, especially the limitations, and how can companies accommodate candidates, who utilize tools such as screen readers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So about the assessment, we all one of the biggest barrier for people neurodiverse talent is that they are not good test takers, and that if we take the same kind of a screening method using test and assessments, they have failed. So we have been promoting different methods of assessment. In some cases, we are saying, let's give them 3 chances, because these individuals, they take time to get used to these assessment methods and instructions. So we are kind of tweaking those processes. Talking about other technology, I think in last 10 years, companies, they have become more and more sensitive to and aware on the accessibility issues. So there are tools out there, and pretty much all the technology companies are utilizing. One of the things which we are always recommending, let's have reanalyze these technologies in terms of accessibilities, and that we have started seeing companies are exploring that and reaching out to their providers and making sure these technologies are accessible. Another thing the technology can play a big role in coming years is, as we are customizing these processes, our HR tech solutions are not built for this customized flexibilities and changes of accommodations. So in my view, the technology is going to bring in this new way of processing this hiring process from start to finish and accommodate some of those things. So, and as I mentioned earlier, the AI and machine learning technology methods are going to also help us bring in efficiency, bring in more scalability, because as we know that hiring 100 or 200 or 700 people in last 10, 12 years is not enough. When we are adding 50,000 people, neurodivergent people on the spectrum in the society, we have to have built those. So technology is going to help us all these different things in coming years.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question. I wish I could keep all of you brilliant minds for so much longer. I'm definitely going to connect with all of you on LinkedIn, because I feel like I need to keep these conversations going. And I'll invite all of our audience members to do the same, because there's still so much we can learn. But I just want to come back to Aubrey around interviews, because this is something that I'm thinking a lot about. I'm hiring a lot at Brandwatch, and I feel like the interview is one of the most challenging parts of the job search process, especially for us as employers, to make it more inclusive. So how should companies implement an interview process that is inclusive and accommodating for all these lived experiences, including people with disabilities?
Absolutely, Abba. Thank you so much. So yeah, the interview process is daunting to everyone, right? Whether you're neurodivergent, neurotypical, getting asked a question. I always use this example: how many golf balls will fit in an airplane? Who knows, right? Like, if I answer that question, whatever my answer is, does not help someone know if I could do that job or not. So yeah, and with that as well, we don't believe that rapport, that that back and forth conversation, ability to have common interests is indicative of how a person will perform their job responsibilities. So we find that skill-based hiring allows candidates to showcase their technical skills that are needed for the job. We help companies design these skill-based hiring processes. And they take different shapes and forms, but always focuses on the skills that candidates need to possess and have to demonstrate those to the hiring managers. Felicia, did just mention this a few moments ago, that these alternate interview practices, they're great for everyone, and not just people with disabilities, not just for people for neurodivergent and autistic talent and job seekers. So highlighting what someone is capable of bringing to the team, rather than looking at those commonalities and shared interests, is how you make that interview process inclusive and accommodating. And at the very least, if you're a hiring manager, if you're involved in a hiring decision, simply asking the person you're interviewing what accommodations they might need to have in that interview process, will make them feel much more comfortable. And it also allows you to potentially access great underutilized talent.
Amazing. Thanks, Aubrey. Sorry, Nish, I know you raised your hand, but I really want to bring Felicia in before I pass the mic to Michelle, because Felicia, I feel like you're also going to have some insight on this, especially how we can make candidates feel comfortable to disclose their needs. Please.
Absolutely. The one thing that I want to say, and I want to follow up on, and most of us have talked about this throughout the day, is we keep talking about managers, hiring managers, supervisors, et cetera. Do companies really want to know what they can do to be successful? Train your managers, right? Absolutely. Training hiring managers, training supervisors so that they have disability awareness, interacting with people with disabilities, accommodations, those supervisory conversations, et cetera. So that's number one. Number two, about self-ID and disclosure. Everyone, candidates, understand those are two very different things. Self-identifying is checking the box. It's anonymous. It does not follow you into your HR record. It is simply a way for the company to understand what the overall population looks like. And the more that we self-identify in that way, checking the box, the better opportunity we have for additional resources to be allocated to us in the workplace. Disclosure is the conversation, right? You're now hired, you need an accommodation, you disclose your disability, and that can happen in the hiring process and with managers. But that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where our managers and interview recruiters absolutely need to be empowered to effectively manage those situations so that we are bringing in the most talented people who just happen to have a disability.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that reminder. I feel like this panel discussion has flown by, but I'm giving you a round of applause on behalf of all the participants in the room. Thank you so much. We're now going to move on to the Q&A because I know we've had a lot of questions. I can also see so many comments happening in the chat. I'm going to do my best to reply to the ones that are relevant for me, and I invite the panelists to also do the same. But thank you so much for this great discussion, and I'm going to pass the mic back to Michelle and the Monster team.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again to our panelists, but also for being such an engaged audience. Just one note on the topic of interview before we jump in. Someone had commented that in a recent interview, started in an awesome way for them that set the tone for them to disclose their disability. The hiring manager asked, "What's one thing about you that I wouldn't be able to tell from reading your resume?" And what a great disarming approach to open that conversation and really put it on the candidate to discuss what they feel comfortable with. So just a lot of positive comments and great sharing here. A lot of what we're hearing as well is in terms of the terminology and making sure that we're all kind of talking the same language, and hearing someone say, "I've heard of neurotypical versus neurodiverse. I haven't heard of neurodominant until now. Is that preferable to neurotypical?" What are our thoughts on that?
I would say just the terminologies depend on the individual themselves, and it's their personal choice. What we have seen, and there are a lot of statistics shows that, it also varies by country to country. So the best approach is ask them, what do they prefer?
Great. In terms of the specific Monster and Brandwatch partnership and that full report that you'll be getting tomorrow, how are you defining disability? This person pointed out that within the federal government, there are more than 50 different definitions.
The definition is defined by ADA, and they have all the categories listed and defined. That's how companies and employers are going. And when we consider the talent for our employer partners, that's how we consider ADA standards.
I'll let you answer the question from the Brandwatch perspective, because Brandwatch really did that research.
Yeah, and I really like the point that Felicia was making earlier around like that difference between actually like having the conversation where people are like create the space to disclose what their needs are. And I think that's really where we want to move the conversation. We want people who have a certain lived experience and have needs that aren't met by people from the dominant groups to articulate that and talk about that. I have people that I work with who, admit that they have a disability, and they're putting things like anxiety and long-term depression as one of those things. And that might not be something that the law has yet officially defined as such, but if that person is disclosing that as something, that means they're going to need a bit more time off, or they're going to need some kind of accommodations, then that's what we're going to accept. And I think that's where we're trying to really like move the conversation, which is why I really love those contributions that Felicia was making earlier. So hopefully that answers the question and also gets us to think a bit more creatively about how we want to define that, and also how we want to make our cultures more inclusive.
And in my view, the self-ID or self-disclosure is all depend on how the organizations are building that trusted environment, right? If the individual, if they trust the organization, then they are going to volunteer. And that is very important. And that trust can be built by the leadership team, how they communicate, how they message, and how they build that inclusive culture and demonstrate in action that they are serious about diversity. And that is so important. And that's where we have seen great success.
Great points. And there was a comment that just came in, really hit home for me. It says, we find that many people don't realize their situation is considered a disability. As somebody who has struggled with anxiety, I thought that was just kind of the hustle stress culture, when in fact, accommodations do need to be made. How can managers and organizations create an environment or culture that would allow people with disabilities, especially those with hidden or invisible disabilities, feel more seen?
Again, ask the question, right? And definitely you have to train people in order to understand how to really interact with others. And part of that is just making sure that it is part of your process. So instead of wondering what question to ask, if someone needs an accommodation, we should just be asking everyone. It should be part of our process. We're asking, do you require an accommodation for the interview process? Do you require an accommodation to perform the essential functions of the job? And really ensuring that, when I was at Manpower Group and I trained all of our employees in different branches, I actually had them write that on the internal whiteboard inside. This is the question that you can ask everyone.
Yeah.
Can you perform the essential functions of the job with or without an accommodation?
That's a great point.
One of the things what we have seen, that once you build that awareness, one of the challenges as the world of work has changed, has become so dynamic, and this new generation, they change jobs. So people are going to move. So now the next challenge is, how do we sustain that culture? How do we sustain that knowledge? Because a couple of new people in the workplace can be a challenging when we have this culture of inclusion. So that sustainability is very important.
Absolutely.
A lot of what we've talked about is kind of the remote work and making accommodations for those that aren't physically in the office. What are some good jumping off places that employers who have employees with depression, anxiety, especially in a blue collar situation with employees that have to go to job sites? Any suggestions there?
Can I have some examples from Brandwatch? Oh, sorry. And then I'll pass the mic just very quickly. We make it like a very open conversation that there are resources that are available. So we've paid for employees to be trained to become mental health first aiders. It's a really big thing here in the UK. We also have an employee assistance program, which is available to all global staff, and that's a hotline. But we've also, to Felicia's point, reminded managers that they have to create the space for these conversations to happen. One-to-ones are not just about the transactions of the role and their output. It's also about the needs that they have to be productive. I know Felicia wanted to add something too, so I'll just pass the mic.
Yeah, as someone who lives with mental illness, I can tell you that it's never easy to have those conversations regardless, right? It just isn't. I work for the National Organization on Disability, and I had an issue last year. I didn't want to disclose it. It's very difficult to make those decisions. And as we see an increase as a result of COVID and everything, it's COVID, it's political, it's, everything that we have had as far as injustice is concerned with populations in the US and all over the world. We ultimately need to go above and beyond that process of referring people to the EAP, I love that mental health, that you have someone that they can talk to, everyone feels comfortable talking about it. Everyone understands that, yes, anxiety and depression is a mental health disability. And these are the things that we can do for you, even in a manufacturing environment, right? Do you need to take an hour for lunch? We're going to allow that to happen so that you can go to a quiet place. Do you need to take time off? And it's it's a disability. It's short-term disability. It's not MLFA, like FLMA. And making sure that HR understands the difference, because a lot of HR do not understand the difference between that.
Felicia, I'm going to stick with you for a second. Someone specifically asked you, in the efforts to employ people with disabilities, would you brief on some of the complex financial challenges related to income and government?
Yes, unfortunately, that can be a huge challenge. I have experienced that myself with hiring people with disabilities, is that they're nervous about losing their benefits. And we make it fairly difficult to understand. It's a very complicated process. And you need to make sure that whatever agency you're working with, if you know that they are actually doing benefits training with their people, so they understand how work affects those benefits, and that they're within the time period, they're within how much they can earn overall. It's not within one period of time, it's overall. And then do they still continue to have time? Very complicated process. We do not make it easy, but we as employers want to know that there is actually training that people can go through so that they do understand how it affects their benefits. Younger people, also very important to make sure that their parents are involved in that process. Had a heartbreaking situation myself with trying to hire someone, and the mother just would not allow this person with Asperger's to go to work because she was afraid of his benefits.
Same experience. And then once we were able to place and saw the success, parents were very happy. But it is a very difficult decision for parents.
Exactly.
If I could just add one thing. So we have job coaches that work with the individuals with disabilities. So when they're going to look for jobs, and so situations like this, how will it impact my benefits? They work directly with them to say, here's how many hours you can work, but they don't leave them. So we have long-term follow-through of how's it going? How many hours have you worked this past month? Okay, next month you need to lower it a little bit, or this might happen. So I think it's important to make sure that job coaches are involved in the processes to guide individuals with whatever type of disability through processes such as this.
Great. This is a specific one, especially as we are in the world of remote work and having to take on different roles as managers. How can a neurotypical manager best accommodate multiple team members with seemingly opposing accommodations? One needs Zoom cameras on, one for hearing impairment, another needs Zoom cameras off for various reasons. How can you make sure that your team even has an inclusive environment outside of just your organization?
I think just when they are setting up those systems and policies, number one, it should be very clearly communicated. First is defined and communicated with everyone, because it is complex. But I think that communication is very important.
I think too, by setting an example, right? So instead of me, like the overall hope is that we flip the responsibility of the person with the disability being responsible for helping you to feel comfortable with my disability, for helping you to understand what it is that you need to do, right? We should all be prepared to have those conversations as employers. And the one thing that I would say is that don't put it on me to tell you that I have a hearing impairment and you need to put on live transcription when it's available. Do it with everything that you do. Make it available, turn it on, make sure, and be the example in your organization with your team members. Ensure that you are supporting your team members and they're open to having those conversations so that we can feel like, I can just say, yes, I do have a hearing impairment, but it's not around being forced to disclose. It is that it's just part of me and I feel comfortable in having that conversation, but really flipping it. It has to be flipped. We cannot continue to put the onus on people with disabilities going into an interview to then make that person in front of them feel comfortable with the fact that A, I do have a disability, whether it's visible or not, and B, these are all of the things that I can do regardless of whether or not I have a disability. We should be asking the questions about skills and abilities and not focusing on that person's disability and forcing them to make me feel comfortable.
Absolutely. And then Felicia, on that, when, we're talking about about meetings and virtual meetings, allowing somebody to, walk around if it, to pace a room. Again, having the camera off, as opposed to having the camera on, as long as that person, is able to be engaged in that conversation, being engaged in, what's their responsibilities and being able to be successful. We work with a lot of people who don't like to have their camera on, and that's totally fine. Christina mentioned job coaching. We are completely still able to job coach if people, choose not to have their camera on. Or if somebody chooses not to speak, even if their camera is off and wants to type in the chat, right? So we are being accommodating in that way that, totally fine. Again, with even note-taking in meetings, having an agenda sent ahead of time, even with just bullet points, so you know what is being expected, what's going to be covered in that meeting. Using, plain language or just specific language. Instead of saying, hey, please be prepared to speak for 2 minutes at the meeting. Okay, what am I talking about 2 minutes on, right? So instead of saying, please have a list of things that you've worked on this week. What do you still have to accomplish? What are you going to work on next week? So just really, giving that information and just, again, being accommodating, open to, how somebody works best.
I love that.
Like you said, it, allowing, us to, have to be comfortable. And, we all should be.
Right. And I just want to piggyback off of something Felicia said. We as leaders, we need to know our teams. So at Easterseals, I have a team that support individuals that are deaf and hard of hearing, meaning some of them are deaf and hard of hearing. So when I schedule a virtual meeting, I need to make sure I have video relay set up if it's only one of them on the meeting. If it's multiple individuals, then I need to make sure I have an interpreter. Same way we would do for a non-English speaking individual. We need to know our team and make sure that we have things in place so they don't feel out of place because they're trying to do their jobs and collaborate with everyone else.
Yeah, 100%.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I can't believe, actually, I can believe this is an incredible conversation. I can 100% believe that we spent the entire time here. Personally, I love the conversations that everyone have been having on the side. I've seen people include their LinkedIn, their emails to keep that conversation going. Clearly, not only is this a very passionate topic, but one where people are asking, how can they better recruit persons with disabilities? And so much of our conversation today talked about creating that inclusive environment for candidates as you're in those interview processes, making sure that people are comfortable once they're already part of the organization. But the one quick thing I wanted to say is it really starts before that, right? It starts with your employer brand. It starts with how you're communicating externally about the organization and the practice that you have internally too. So that's my one last thing to say on that. Julia, do you want to close us out here?
I just wanted to say quickly, I know we're coming to the end. Thank you so, so much. First of all, to Abba from Brandwatch. What a wonderful, wonderful moderator you were. We're so grateful to have you lead such a wonderful discussion. I kind of want to do it again. And to all of our panelists, each one of you brought something incredible. And I want to stay in touch with all of you to see what else we can do to further this discussion, because it's very important to us at Monster. Please do, anyone who's on the call now, we will be sending out a recording of this. We'll be sending out the Brandwatch report. Do connect with us on LinkedIn. Thank you all so, so much for the great work that you're doing. And keep connected with Monster, because we'll continue to share more content like this throughout the year. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Appreciate it.
Thank you.